In the frozen muck outside Kharkov, February 1943, an entire German army is about to be wiped off the map. Stalin's tanks are swarming, Berlin is screaming for a last stand, and one field marshal quietly folds the map, looks his staff in the eye, and says, "We're pulling back, so we can hit them harder." That man is Erich von Manstein, the only general Hitler feared more than the Red Army, and in the next few minutes you'll see exactly why his reward for saving Germany's Eastern Front was a pink slip. Most people think the Nazis lost the war because they ran out of tanks or fuel. The truth is, they ran out of patience with the one guy who still knew how to use them. Manstein wasn't some party hack. He was a dusty old Prussian aristocrat, steeped in a military tradition that stretched back centuries. He cared about one thing: operational checkmate, the art of outthinking and outmaneuvering the enemy. While Hitler doodled new bunkers on tourist maps, obsessed with holding every inch of ground, Manstein turned entire Soviet fronts into Rubik's cubes and solved them in under a week, always prioritizing flexibility and decisive action. And the Führer, blinded by his own ego, hated him for it. Born Fritz Erich von Lewinsky in 1887, he was adopted by the Manstein clan, a family that produced generals the way other families produce postage stamps. This wasn't just a career path, it was his heritage, a life dedicated to the rigorous pursuit of military excellence. By 1914, he's already on the Western Front, learning firsthand that static, grinding frontal assaults are nothing short of murder. This cemented his belief in Bewegungskrieg, or maneuver warfare. Hit hard, move fast, and always unbalance the enemy. By 1939, he's on the planning staff, watching Hitler approve half-baked attacks into Poland, often ignoring sound military advice. Manstein's hobby? Quietly rewriting those plans after hours, crafting strategies that actually made sense. His first big rewrite became legendary: the Sichelschnitt. The official plan for invading France was to punch through Belgium, just like in 1914. It was safe, predictable, and a slow lane to a stalemate. Manstein proposed something so audacious it made the High Command balk: send the bulk of Germany's armored spearhead through the impassable Ardennes forest. The plan was brilliant. A feint attack in the north would draw the Allies forward, while Manstein's main armored thrust would cut through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, and sweep to the Channel coast, splitting the French and British armies. This was a masterpiece of speed, surprise, and coordination, relying heavily on Stuka dive bombers to maintain momentum. The generals laughed, of course, until Guderian's tanks rolled out of the forest on May 13, 1940, completely catching the Allies off guard. France collapsed 6 weeks later. One daring maneuver, one promotion, and one very jealous dictator who suddenly realized his planners were smarter than he was. Fast forward to 1941. Manstein is handed the 11th Army and told to take the fortress of Sevastopol in Crimea. Stalin expected a long, bloody siege, but Manstein, ever the innovator, wasn't playing by the rules. He knew a traditional siege would bleed his army dry. Instead, he employed a remarkable combination of flexibility and force. He dragged super-heavy railway guns, some of the largest artillery ever built, to pound the forts. Then, while the Soviets were distracted, he launched a fake amphibious feint, drawing their reserves away before ramming infantry through a ravine everyone assumed was impassable. It was a daring frontal assault, executed with such precision and surprise that the fortress fell on July 4, 1942. Hitler pinned field marshals' batons on him in person. The press called him the Lion of Crimea. Inside Hitler's bunker, they called him the man who makes the Führer look slow. November 1942. The Sixth Army is encircled at Stalingrad. Manstein is given Operation Winter Storm and told to charge 60 kilometers through ice and overwhelming Soviet tank armies. He knew a frontal assault was suicide. He asked for freedom to abandon useless positions, to shorten his lines, and to concentrate his precious panzers for a decisive breakthrough. This was classic Manstein, sacrificing territory to gain tactical advantage. But Hitler, rigid and incapable of retreat, refused with his infamous declaration, "Not 1 meter will be surrendered." Manstein obeyed publicly, but secretly shuffled troops, pushing his forces with desperate urgency. He almost reached the pocket, his panzers fighting through blizzards and fierce resistance. Yet the Sixth Army S radio only crackled back a heartbreaking message. "We fight to the last bullet." The relief failed, and from that moment, Manstein knew the war would be lost in committee rooms, not on the maps where he excelled. Now comes the masterpiece. February 1943. The Red Army, flush with victory from Stalingrad, surges west, overextended and vulnerable. The German lines are buckling. Manstein begs permission to retreat further, to stretch the Soviet spearheads even thinner, then slam them with fresh panzer reserves. It was a classic rope-a-dope strategy. Hitler, predictably, rages, screaming about giving up German soil. Manstein waits until the line is truly buckling, until the Soviets are utterly exposed. Then, quietly, he radios, "Operation Donnerschlag. Execute." The 4th Panzer Corps swings south, while the 1st SS Panzer Corps smashes in from the west, enveloping 3 entire Soviet armies. In 3 weeks, against all odds, Kharkov is back in German hands. Morale soars. Hitler takes the salute in the recaptured city, but the smile is thin. He knows the true victory belongs to the tall Prussian standing beside him, a man whose genius he couldn't contain. March 1944, Berchtesgaden. The war situation is dire. Manstein walks in, not with flattery but with grim casualty charts and a simple demand: transfer forces to the Eastern Front and allow an elastic defense. Let the front breathe, trade space for time, and preserve the army. Hitler slams the table, his face contorted with fury. "You just want to run back to the Dnieper." Manstein, usually composed, snaps back, "Mein Führer, if we stand still, we'll simply be shot where we stand." The room goes tomb silent. It was a direct challenge to Hitler's authority. 2 weeks later, he's relieved, for reasons of health, replaced by a general whose chief talent was shouting, "Hold!" Manstein's dismissal was a critical blow, removing arguably Germany's most capable strategist. Historians crunch the numbers. Between January and March 1943, Manstein's counterstrokes at Kharkov cost the Soviets roughly 1,500 tanks and 50,000 prisoners. What if Manstein had been allowed to implement his mobile defense strategies in 1944? Army Group Center might not have been annihilated. A mobile defense could have delayed the Russians significantly, perhaps allowing the Western Allies to meet them deeper in Germany, maybe even forcing a negotiated armistice instead of unconditional surrender. Of course, the overwhelming superiority of the Allies made a German victory nearly impossible. Yet Manstein's brilliance offered the best chance to prolong resistance or achieve a better outcome. But ego overruled arithmetic, and the only man who could still count divisions was sent home to tend roses. So, the Lion of Crimea, the brain behind the Sichelschnitt, spends the last year of the war on forced leave, listening to BBC bulletins in a dressing gown. After 1945, he'll spend 4 years in Allied prisons, then write the bestseller Lost Victories. He died in 1973, still convinced that operational brilliance could have trumped industrial might and rigid ideology. Maybe he was deluded by his own genius, or maybe he was the last commander who understood that wars are won by ideas, not just by iron and will. The next time someone says Hitler lost because of winter or oil, remind them, he also fired the one general who could still turn retreat into a rope-a-dope victory. If you've got a what if about Kharkov, or a thought on whether brilliant tactics can survive toxic leadership, drop it in the comments. And if you want more stories of genius buried by bureaucracy, hit subscribe, because history's best plot twists are never the ones written by the winners. They're the ones erased by the egos.